One of the important abilities to do in sports analytics is prediction. In particular, prediction of future events that affect your team or your league. What we're going to try now is coming up with ways to predict the attendance of future games. So the objective is to look at 3 games that are coming up in the next week. In particular, Thursday, June 8th, Friday, June 9th, and Sunday the 11th against these various teams. Now, what I've done is I've selected these games because they all are slightly different, but they all take place at Chase Field in Phoenix. So let's think about how we would come up with predictions for these games, and in particular, um, how we can learn about the Diamondbacks' schedule and the unique characteristics of Chase Field to try to come up with better informed predictions instead of just guessing what the attendance would be. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to pull some data from a website called BaseballReferencecom, and I'm going to show you some very basic steps that can be done to sort this data and be able to analyze it in a way to be able to answer this question of attendance at future games. So a little bit about Chase Field. It's been around for almost 20 years. Originally was called Bank One Ballpark, and at some point, Chase Bank came in as the corporate sponsor. The interesting thing is this is one of the largest capacity stadiums in Major League Baseball. Almost 50,000 seats is the capacity, and you'll see that in the very high nosebleed seats on the top left of this photo and on the top right of this photo, it's quite tough to get people to sit up there. I think it's an oversized stadium, but that gives you an idea of what the maximum capacity would theoretically be if this was a sold out game. So let's talk about how we would make the forecast for attendance. There's a couple ways. One way to do it is to estimate by analogy. In other words, to look at very similar games that took place on a Thursday, a Friday, and a Sunday, and try to see what the attendance was for those games, and then try to uh, compare roughly what these future games, how similar or different they are from those past games. So that's one way. I don't think that's very accurate, and it relies a lot on guessing. So we're going to use method two, which is actually looking at historical data, that is past attendance at Chase Field, and then use a little bit of our expert judgment to try to figure out what additional factors may influence the attendance of these particular games that we're interested in, these 3 games on June 8th, 9th, and 11th. So let's talk about briefly what factors could affect the attendance of a game. So I think weekday games are less popular than weekend games. If you have a game that's during the day, during work hours, that happens once in a while. That's not going to be as well attended as a game that's in the evening. Of course, the weather, not in the particular example of Chase Field, because you should, if some of you may have been there, but you should be aware that the roof is actually retractable. So if there's rain outside or extreme heat, they go ahead and close this roof and make the inside a very comfortable 70 or 75 degrees. Um, but the weather could affect the commute to getting somewhere. That's harder to predict. Free giveaways are something that I think would increase the attendance. Who the opponent is and how the opponent is doing, how the home team is doing, and then maybe even some possible personal or team records that are about to be broken. The harder thing to account for is other competing sporting events. So, in particular, let me point out that of these 3 games that I want you to consider, one of those, I won't tell you which one, but you're going to have to look this up. One of these games conflicts with the NBA Finals. So if people have to make a choice between going to a regular season game at Chase Field or watching the NBA Finals on TV, depending on what sport you like better, you might choose one over the other. So these are other things to consider, not just other sporting events that may conflict, but also other events in and around Phoenix that may conflict. For instance, if there's a big conference at the Phoenix Convention Center, that actually may help attendance at Chase Field because when folks go to this conference, the conference ends and they just walk to their hotel and get together for dinner and talk about, hey, what are we going to do tonight? Oh, there's a home game at Chase Field. It's a couple of blocks away. Let's walk over there and do it. So think about all these considerations that may affect the actual attendance of a game. So first item for you is to be able to look up the information on these three games. So we're going to go to this website, mlb.com/dbacks, and look at these particular games that I'm referring to. So here we are on the website, mlb.com/dbacks, and we're going to go to schedule. And when I hover, I haven't clicked on anything. I've just hovered my mouse over this menu and allows me to select the 2017 schedule. So because we're already in the month of June, it automatically pulls up the calendar for the month. So the first game that we are interested in is the Thursday, June 8th game against the Padres. So when I hover my mouse over it, it tells me some information about that game, not just that it's at 12:40, but also that there's a promotion that day called Throwback Thursday. Now, this is a difficult one to compare because it's a day game during the week. And you're going to have to look this up, but I think the Padres are in last place in the National League West. So that's probably not going to be a very well attended game. You're going to have to make a judgment about that. The very next game, however, on Friday, June 9th, is a evening game against the Milwaukee Brewers. I don't know how the Brewers are doing this year, but Friday nights are usually a little bit more popular. There are no promotions that day, though. No promotions that game. And the third and final game I want you to consider is also against the Brewers, but this is a Sunday afternoon game or early afternoon game, 1 o'clock, 1:10 p.m. first pitch. But look at all these promotions going on. Let me expand this link. And it looks like there are multiple promotions. There's not only a, we're looking at this one here, not only do the first 10,000 kids get a free, this must be a plastic wiffle ball bat, but there's also something going on with Baxter's birthday, and Baxter is the mascot for the Diamondbacks. And then there's a military and first responder discount. Okay, so three promotions in one game. So probably this is going to influence attendance on the Sunday early afternoon game. Okay, so the second thing we're going to do is we're going to look at historical information on attendance at Diamondbacks games. In order to do this, we'll go to this website called BaseballReferencecom. And first thing I want to point out is that there are some sibling websites up here, football, basketball, hockey, soccer, that all contain the same format. So all the processes that you're going to see me go through, you can replicate these things in these other websites. Okay, so for now we're interested in just the Arizona Diamondbacks. There are several ways to get to this team. We can either click on this link called Teams, or here from the homepage you'll see that it's available because they list this current standings. So here you go. Padres are actually in fourth place in the National League West, and the Brewers, who are the other opponents, are in first place in the National League Central. So two two first place teams playing each other. Okay, so that might be interesting. Let's look at Arizona only. So Arizona currently is tied for first place with the Colorado Rockies. So there is a lot of information about this team on this page, and you can see that the roster is available, the team statistics, the pitching, all the fielding totals. Okay, but the only thing we're interested in are the schedule and results available at the very, very top of this page. So by clicking on this page, we get the information that we are interested in is here, attendance. So when you hover over any of these columns, you get a definition of that particular the data under that column. Now you'll see in this case, they actually define what attendance means. It's the number of tickets sold at that game. No, that's very different than the number of people attended, right? So I would say this is a little bit of an inflated number because people who actually attend a game is slightly lower than number of tickets sold. But so this is the number we're going to use. Not a big deal. It's still very helpful. They list all the attendance for all the games so far. So you'll notice a few things. Uh, Up until present time, the most recent game was played Thursday, June 1st. I'm recording this video on Saturday, so you'll see that the Friday information has not been uploaded. So that already tells you the data is already a day old or a day behind in terms of updating this website. That's pretty good. Pretty good. Okay, so how do we take all this information and actually use it to understand the typical attendance for Diamondbacks games? So what we're going to do is we're going to first modify this table. So I'm going to click on Share and More and select the first option, which is Modify and Share. So what it does is it converts this table into an editable format. Okay, so because I'm only interested in home games and attendance at those home games, there are a lot of columns on here that I'm going to actually eliminate. So the nice thing about BaseballReference.com is it has these little circle buttons so that if I click on, it eliminates that column. So I'm going to eliminate streak. I'm going to eliminate the opponent, whether it was a win or a loss, all the other information that is irrelevant to this particular question that I want to answer. Okay, so I am leaving this column, which is showing me whether the game is home or away. I'm going to eliminate the team column because by default, all the data in this table is for the Arizona Diamondbacks. I'm also going to eliminate the box score. I don't care about the details of the game. I only care about whether the game was at home and what the attendance was at that game. Now, the season is still going on, and the data here is displayed in chronological order, meaning that we only have information available up until the present time or delayed by a day. So what I'm going to do is, because all this information is blank, I'm actually going to click on the little button that looks like a home plate, and it's going to eliminate all the rows underneath. So now I'm only left with attendance for games up to the present time. Okay. Now I'm ready to extract the data and put it into a program that I can do some manipulation on. So I'm going to go back to this Share and More pull down menu, and I'm going to get to table as a CSV. Now CSV stands for comma separated value. I'm going to click on that, and you're going to see how the data now changed from a very nice graphical summary in a table to sort of a very raw looking piece of data, which I'm going to copy. Okay. I'm going to highlight it, right click, and select copy. So now I've got all this data on home attendance, Actually, on total attendance. I'm going to do some additional sorting in just a moment. But I've got all this data on attendance to date for this season. So in Microsoft Excel, I'm going to paste this data. Um, there it is. Now you'll see that it's sort of all crunched into a few, only into column A. So we have to do some additional steps in order to separate the data into multiple columns. So I'm going to go to the data column, and there's an option there called text to columns. And what it does is it starts to separate the information that you have, as long as it's separated by commas. In this case, it's delimited by commas. I'm going to hit next. And then I'm going to say, nope, comma is the actual separator for this information. Hit next. Yeah, that's great. Finish. Oops, sorry. Let me do that again. I should have highlighted the entire uh, sheet before I did that. So I highlighted the entire sheet, or I can actually just get away with highlighting column A because all the data is in column A. I'm going to, again, go to Data, Menu, Text to Columns, Delimited, correct, comma delimited. And you'll see down here, it gives you a preview of what the data is going to look like before we actually select Finish. Look at that. That's great. That's what I want. You notice that the data in column B sort of creeps into column C. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get right in between those two columns, and I'm going to double click. And what it does is it automatically readjusts the width of that column. Now, this column C is not labeled anything because when we pulled the data from BaseballReference.com, it didn't have a label back then anyway. So I do want to label it now. And I'm just going to call it H or A, as in home or away. Now, because the question that I want you to answer has to do with whether the attendance at home gives us any hints, we want to get rid of all the games that are uh, away, and those are marked by this @ symbol. So you'll see that the Diamondbacks played a bunch of away games, then they came home, played a bunch of games at home, and then played a bunch of games away, and so forth. So what I'm going to do is I can either manually come in and remove each row, which would take me a few minutes or a few seconds to do, or I can be a little smarter and say, okay, let's go to Data and Sort. So what I'm going to do is now sort the data by whether the games were home or away. Before we even do this though, you have to select this button that says My Data has Headers. And what this tells Excel is that row number 1 are just labels, and everything underneath is data. Okay? So we click that, and you'll see how it sort of left out row number 1. And then I'm going to say sort by H or A. Okay? So what it's done is it's put all the away games on the top and all the home games on the bottom. So now I can just select the first few rows. Now I'm going to right click on this section and I'm going to say delete. Goodbye. Now I'm only left with data for home attendance. So there's only been 29 home games. Okay, now let's do some analysis on this data. This column is no longer useful to me because I've already sorted the data. So I could right click on column C and say goodbye as well. Now I'm only left with the information that I care about. I'm going to double click on this spot between columns C and D to readjust the size. Okay, I'm gonna do one more thing, because in order to look at these numbers, it's much easier for me to appreciate how large these values are when there's a comma in between. So I'm gonna go to Home and click the comma button, and it's going to convert the number to a different format. And I don't really need the decimal points, so I'm gonna click on this button and say I'm not interested in fractions or decimals. I just want the whole number. Okay, so here's the attendance for the home games thus far at Diamondback Stadium at Chase Field. Now what I'm going to do is try to get some summary statistics for this data only. So I'm going to add a couple of rows underneath. One is going to be called average. The other one's going to be called minimum. The next one, maximum. And then the last one, standard deviation. Okay, and I'll explain how each of these are going to be helpful to us. So let's use formulas in Excel to calculate these four things. So with our mouse here on this particular cell, I'm going to go to formulas, and there's already some frequently used formulas in this menu called AutoSum. So I want Excel to calculate the average of all, and look how it automatically highlighted the information above. Now, if it didn't automatically do that, you can actually put the mouse here and highlight it yourself, or you could go into the formula itself, say this was blank, and manually type in, I want you to analyze the data from cell C2 all the way to C30, and then you get the same result. Okay, so the outcome you get is 22,649. So that is the average number of tickets sold for the first 29 games this season. Now, that gives me a good sense of what the typical number is, but I also want to understand the range of numbers. So what's the minimum number of tickets and what's the maximum number of tickets? Let's use other formulas for this as well, okay? So I'm going to go to formulas again, and, oops, sorry, formulas again. Now I'm going to go to, well, my functions are already in here, but if they're not on, they don't show up on here for you, I'm going to go to more functions, okay? Nope. Formulas, more functions. Okay, so here in this function menu, it's asking me to tell it something about the type of formula that I want. So I'm going to type in min for minimum, and down here, it's going to give me some recommendations of formulas that relate to this word, this term. So fortunately, there's one called min, and that gives me the smallest number in a set of values. Okay, that's exactly what I want. And okay, so what's the range? Well, I can either type it in manually, C2 all the way to C30, or I could have highlighted in order to achieve the same outcome. Okay, so the least attended game is 12,215. Now let's go to max. Okay, there's a formula that I can access through this menu, more functions, called max, enter, and here it is, returns the largest value in a set of values. Bingo, that's what I want. Hit OK. So I want you to analyze from cell C2 all the way to C30. Or, I'm going to remove that, I can also just click on this button and it will send me to the data and give me an opportunity to select. And then I'm going to hit enter. C2 to C30, yes, great, go. Okay, so the maximum number is 49,016. And I bet you that was opening day. Game 1, 49,000. Yes, opening day is always very popular. Okay, so we know the average, we know the minimum, we know the maximum. Another descriptive statistic is standard deviation. So there's a formula for that as well. I go to formula, auto sum, more functions, and then I'm going to type in standard deviation. So there are a lot of versions of this formula. Let's just use the very basic one called STDEV for standard deviation. Okay, and it estimates the standard deviation based on a sample. Okay, yeah, that's what I want. Give me the standard deviation of C2 to C30. Okay, either I'm typing it in manually or I go to the uh, actual data, highlight it, and go to the data, highlight it, and then hit enter. All right, beautiful. So what this information tells me is that one standard deviation from the mean, that is 8,000 fans, either above or below the mean, above the $22,000 number or below the $22,000 number, the majority of the data sits within that range. So to put it in different terms, um, about 60% of the time, the attendance at Chase Field is between 30,000, that is 8,000 plus 22, between 30,000 and 22,000 minus 8, so that's 14,000. So 14,000 to 30,000, 66% of the time, that is the attendance at Chase Field. Okay, so now your job is to replicate what I've done in Microsoft Excel by using the data um, on BaseballReference.com. But notice that the only thing that I've done is I've compared data from 2017. What you could do is look at data from the 2016 season as well, or look at data for an entire decade and try to utilize that information to figure out how the various promotions, how the various opponents influence this column right here, which is attendance sorted by this column here, home games. Okay, I hope that's enough information for you to replicate this, and then eventually your objective is to submit your predictions on this survey. Okay, so let me go to this survey and show you where I want you to enter your predictions for this particular exercise. It's a Google survey that I've created, and what I want you to do is enter your prediction. This is numerical input for the Thursday game, and then I want you to justify how did you come up with this number. Okay, just give me a few data points on how you actually obtain that. Then you estimate your attendance, the attendance on the Friday game, and justify that. And then finally, the attendance at the Sunday game and justify that. Okay, so that is the extent of this particular exercise. There are more components of homework number one in the first inning, but this just will get you started with utilizing the data from baseballreference.com and making some inferences and some descriptive statistics, in particular average, minimum, maximum, and standard deviation. All right, play ball.